When you hear the name Don Bradman, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most of us, it's the icon, right? The almost perfect sporting hero, this symbol of Australian grit and dominance. And for decades, that's the story we've been told. But what if that legend, that flawless image, isn't the real story? Thanks to his private letters, we're now getting a look at a far more calculated and frankly more interesting man. And that's exactly what we're going to deconstruct today. And just listen to the man himself. This is from his own private correspondence. He says most people see him as difficult and even cantankerous. He calls himself shy, sure, but then he admits to having a pugnacious streak. I mean, right away, he's giving us a massive contradiction. This wasn't for the press, this was the real Don, and he was way more complex than the myth lets on. So that's the big question, isn't it? Which one was he? The difficult guy? The shy genius? Or, and this is where it gets really fascinating, was his entire public personality just a carefully designed strategy? We're going to peel back the layers of the legend and find the hyper-efficient operator hiding underneath. Okay, let's start with something everyone talks about, his famous aloofness. You know, the idea that he was cold, that he wasn't one of the boys. It's usually chalked up as a personality flaw, but his letters tell a totally different story. It looks like it was all a calculated move. This wasn't about being antisocial, it was about protecting his most important asset, his mental capital. And this is the core of it right here. The public saw a guy who kept his distance, who seemed remote. But in reality, that was a deliberate tactic. Bradman understood way ahead of his time that every handshake, every press interview, every single social obligation drained the very same battery he needed to perform at that superhuman level on the field. So, how did he actually pull this off? Well, he wasn't just avoiding people. He was actively managing his energy. So instead of going for drinks at the bar with the team, he'd spend hours, literally hours, every single day answering letters. It wasn't about being rude, it was about a ruthless, single-minded focus. He drew a hard line in the sand between his public persona and his private life, and that line was absolutely non-negotiable. And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? At the very height of his success, when any other athlete would be soaking up the limelight, Bradman ran the other way. He wanted seclusion and peace. That's not some kind of false modesty. That was the operating principle of a man who knew exactly how draining fame could be, and he simply refused to let it compromise his focus. So, if his social strategy was all about resource management, his on-field strategy, well, that was pure business. We love to talk about his genius, but his letters reveal a mind that worked more like a CEO, analytical, data-driven, and treating the art of batting like it was an investment portfolio. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but it's the absolute key to understanding how his mind worked. In 1934, he became a professional stockbroker. And this wasn't some hobby. He built a really rigorous, disciplined investment philosophy that ended up defining his approach to everything, both on and off the cricket pitch. Just look at his principles. Meticulous analysis of every single factor, a healthy skepticism of just gambling or speculating, a laser focus on solid, long-term value. I mean, this is the language of a modern hedge fund manager, right? It's all about risk management and maximizing your returns over the long haul. And here's where it all clicks. He took that exact same mindset, that same operating system, and he applied it to batting. Every bowler was a market variable. Every fielder was a risk factor. And every shot he played was a calculated investment designed for the maximum possible return with the minimum possible risk of going bankrupt, getting out. Bodyline is the perfect case study for this. I mean, he was facing incredibly dangerous bowling. Everyone expected him to respond with just pure, gutsy, plucky aggression. But instead, the CEO took over. He decided his job had two parts: score runs and avoid getting hurt, asset protection. So he developed this weird, unorthodox technique that worked, and he could not have cared less that people called him cowardly. It was a cold, calculated, and absolutely brilliant business decision. But, you can't operate like that, like this hyper-efficient lone wolf, without creating some serious friction. It's just inevitable. And in Bradman's case, all that individual focus led to some deep, bitter conflicts right inside his own dressing room. Guys like Jack Fingleton and Bill O'Reilly, his own teammates, became his loudest critics. They fueled all kinds of accusations, from him being selfish to being anti-Catholic, which, by the way, his private letters give absolutely no evidence for. See, Bradman worked on a simple, unsentimental principle. What was best for him, scoring a mountain of runs, was by default what was best for the team. But his choice to stay silent when they attacked him just gave them free rein to say whatever they wanted.
Let's put this back in business terms for a second. The transaction cost for his critics to attack him was basically zero. Why? Because Bradman refused to get into a public fight. He never defended himself. So they could chip away at his reputation over and over again without any consequences. It was a huge strategic blind spot. The very silence that helped him focus on the field made him incredibly vulnerable off it.
And Bradman, he knew exactly where a lot of this bad blood came from. Years later, writing about the feud with Fingleton, he pinpointed the source. In his own book, Bradman had just clinically laid out the stats, comparing his own massive success during Bodyline to Fingleton's failures against the exact same bowling. It was a brutal, data-driven takedown. As Bradman himself put it, the truth really hurt. That's the analyst talking, not the diplomat. So this brings us to the final and maybe the most important part of this whole story. This relentless system he built for himself of conserving energy, calculating every risk, managing conflict with silence, all of it came at a huge personal cost, a cost that the public never, ever saw. The man who looked like an indestructible run-scoring machine was, behind closed doors, dealing with the incredible weight of his own system. That constant, grinding pressure to be perfect, to manage every single part of his life with such ruthless efficiency, well, it took a deep and lasting toll. You read his private letters, and they reveal this whole other side. His son, John, battling polio as a kid and then depression later on. His daughter, Shirley, having an intellectual disability. His own chronic, painful battles with fibrositis. These weren't just background noise. These were major drains on the very nervous energy he was fighting so hard to protect. And he managed it all while putting on that face of perfection for the world. And here it is, the final invoice. In his own words, a heavy toll of my nervous energy. It's this quiet, devastating admission of total burnout from the one man who never even seemed to break a sweat. That was the ultimate price of his system. The man who conserved every last ounce of mental capital for cricket eventually found the account was running empty. So when you strip it all back, this is what we're left with. We all know the result of Don Bradman's system. We celebrate it. The records, the legend, they speak for themselves. But now that we've seen the process, the isolation, the conflict, the immense personal toll it took, the real question is, could any of us actually endure